Is America overpopulated? Today on The Population Factor, author and world traveler Frosty Wooldridge discusses his new book, America's Overpopulation Predicament: Blindsiding Future Generations. Is America overpopulated? Recently, we passed 330 million people. How would we know whether we were overpopulated or whether we will soon be overpopulated? Joining me today to answer these questions is author Frosty Wooldridge, author of America's Overpopulation Predicament: Blindsiding Future Generations. Frosty, welcome to The Population Factor.
Well, thank you very much, Phil. It's really a pleasure to be with you and everyone listening across the United States and certainly, hopefully, Canada and around the world. This kind of presentation will give each and every one of you an understanding of the predicament of overpopulation, not only here in the United States, but around the world. So I'm appreciating that we're all in this together, and hopefully we can all do something to change course. So thank you so much.
So Frosty, you first encountered overpopulation on bicycle trips across India, Bangladesh, and China. But the question today is America overpopulated? And, you know, from where a lot of us sit, things are going pretty well. We feel like we're rich and we're living good lives. And I don't hear the politicians saying that we're too overpopulated or that we shouldn't keep growing. Why do you argue in your book that America is overpopulated?
From my own experiences around the world, and certainly having traveled to all 50 states and all 10 Canadian provinces, it's not about space, you know, because there's vast amounts of space. If Antarctica wasn't a frozen wasteland, you could stick a whole civilization there, but their carrying capacity is absolutely zero. So when it comes down to carrying capacity, it's, again, you have to understand it's not about all the vast space that's in this country. What it has to do is with the energy and the resources to keep this civilization moving forward.
But Frosty, some people will say, okay, in California we've got a water shortage, for instance, but what we need to do then is conserve and use water more efficiently. And if we do that, we can support our current population or even a larger one. What would you say to that?
That's called cognitive dissonance. In other words, intellectual denial of reality. And California right now has 39 million people, but within the next 30 to 40 years, it's going to have another 20 million added. So it's going to go from 39 to 49 to 59 million. And so at some point, whether it's 59 million or 90 million or 100 million, you're going to have to understand that there's not going to be enough water to irrigate the crops, to water the people, to flush the toilets, and to keep a balance. Nature always keeps a balance. So either we maintain a balance of human population or Mother Nature is going to do it for us. And she does it around the world right now. Starvation levels are at 4 million for children around the globe and 8 million for adults. So that's 12 million people every year. That's documented by the UN.
But we don't have that kind of starvation here in the United States. So again, when someone like Matthew Iglesias writes a book called 1 Billion Americans, The Case for Thinking Bigger, he argues that we can be more efficient, we can keep the balls in the air, so to speak. What kind of evidence do we have that we really might be pushing up at or past carrying capacity in the United States?
Well, we're not sustainable right now. Again, we import 7 out of 10 barrels of oil, and oil is what keeps this game going. And so at some point, and certainly according to some of the finest authors out there, oil is going to be completely exhausted on this planet by mid-century, certainly at the rate it's being used at over 100 million barrels every day. And I think the latest figures are that China, which puts around 27 million new cars net gain on their highways every year, by 2030, they'll be using 98 million barrels of oil per day themselves. So you're looking at 200 million barrels of oil that will quickly drain the reserves of the planet. So we are essentially, again, riding the Titanic. And it's safe to, Edward Smith, the captain of the Titanic, well, he just kept speeding toward New York, not realizing or didn't care or just completely denied the fact that there were icebergs out there. Well, everybody that says, let's let America grow and grow, and somebody like Iglesias, and I read his book, he doesn't understand numbers. Well, I'm a math and science teacher. And the fact is, this country will not survive 1 billion people any more than India is. And then you have to start speaking about the quality of life.
Right.
What kind of quality of life do we want? Do we want to have Denver, Colorado with 2.7 million people go to 10 million? Do we want another New York City? Do we want Chicago? Or do we want 11 million out of LA?
So this is a good question. There's the question of, can we support, let's say, 10 million people in the Denver area instead of 2.5 million? Then there's the question of, is it a good idea in terms of the quality of life of the people living there? I think, and you and I both live in Colorado, I think most Coloradoans would say, no, we don't want to quadruple our population. But I want to get to another aspect of this, which I think you bring out very nicely in your book. Let's say we could support 10 million people in the Denver area, or 1 billion Americans, and let's say we could even do that with a good quality of life. What about all the other animals, the other plant species that we're displacing? Does that question figure into how you think about overpopulation?
Well, yes, and I think it's about a moral and an ethical question. Do we as a cognitive species have the right, or do we have the imperative to keep expanding our numbers and then create extinction rates that are running around 100 species a day or vanishing off the planet right now? And in fact, E.O. Wilson out of Harvard, the great biologist, said that we could lose a third of all animal life on the planet by 2050. That's a blink in time, only 29 years from now. So each person has to ask themselves, do they want to be a part of causing the hummingbird to go extinct, or the whale to go extinct, or the dolphin, or the rattlesnake, or the gopher, or simply the prairie dog, or the hawk that feeds? So you have to really look at the big picture here, not just we can expand all these numbers and have all these people added to the detriment to the natural world. The natural world is what sustains us, and if we lose that, we lose ourselves, essentially.
So in the end, you really don't think people can have good lives, flourishing lives, unless we connect with nature and unless there's some wild nature there left to connect to.
Well, that's correct. I just came back from Glacier National Park just this last month, also Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons, and also I was also in Moab, and the crush of people is absolutely, I couldn't even get into Rocky Mountain National Park this past week because there are lottery reservations.
That's right.
And if you're unlucky enough, you may never get to see Rocky Mountain National Park with another 100 million people that are projected to land on America here by 2050. And so we have cheated ourselves out of the national parks because lottery numbers is the only way they're going to let you get in. But then when you get into Glacier, which I did, guess what? It's wall-to-wall people. You don't connect with nature. You're just simply running into other people on the trail. The same thing's going on in Colorado right now. I-70 on the weekends is just a gridlock 90 miles long all the way to Summit County because there's so many people. In fact, I've actually asked some of my columns, what is the carrying capacity of Colorado, but what is the quality of life capacity of Colorado?
And those could really be two different things, couldn't they? I mean, again,
yes,
we might be able to sustain 10 million Coloradoans, or 10 million people in the Denver area, 20 million Coloradoans, or whatever it might be. But really, in the process, we could, it's interesting, we could all sort of get richer and wind up being poorer somehow.
Well, and there's exactly what's happening. And having seen that in Bangladesh, and then having seen that in China and certainly India, the greatest democracy in the world, they have so many problems that at some point, when you grow the numbers, you cannot solve the problems.
So, I mean, this is one aspect of this that it could be a little hard for people to wrap their minds around, especially maybe younger viewers, because they hear a couple of old dudes like you and me talking about population or overpopulation, and they really
Right.
might not have a sense of how much things can change. 100 years ago, India had about 200 million people. Now they have 1.3 billion people. And if you had asked an Indian 100 years ago, well, the trajectory seems to be that we're going to have 4 or 5 times as many people in 100 years, they probably wouldn't have thought that was possible. But apparently it was. So I think what you and Matthew Iglesias are both saying is we might wind up with 1 billion people. The difference is he's excited about it, and you as an environmentalist really aren't.
Well, that's exactly correct. And what I deal with, not in emotions, is with facts. And the fact is that the higher the numbers in this country, the more restrictions on your freedom, the more restrictions and the higher costs of living, because water is going to cost more to put that water into your tap. And at some point, you will not have water in the tap. That is going to be a numbers game, and it will come about at some point. Ask anybody from Bangladesh, ask anybody from India, ask anybody from China. Why do you think so much of the rest of the world wants to come to America? Well, Indians are flooding into America, so are Chinese, so are Mexicans, because they have such lowered and or very lacking in quality of life and standard of living because they're so overpopulated. And so if we could take that kind of understanding, which came to me in 1984, realizing that overpopulation is the single greatest factor in every consequence that we're facing in the United States today. The air pollution over Denver is toxic air. Every breath you take is toxic air, particulate, carbon footprint, you name it. As your water literally prices go up, it's because too many people are drawing off the resources of the water. And at some point, the aquifers won't yield enough water. So for somebody like Iglesias to write that book, it was a very foolish book. It had no wisdom in it. It had no understanding of numbers. It had no understanding of resources. It simply was stuck. He put out there, and amazingly, people agreed with him.
But I think you've also, got plenty of emotion behind your position too. I think the difference is, what you and Iglesias might feel emotional about. You're emotional about preserving wild nature. I don't think that's really part of his vision. By the way, I don't want people to get the wrong idea about your book, which is a very good one. Again, the book is America's Overpopulation Predicament, Blindsiding Future Generations. In that book, you make it clear that you don't see dealing with population as the answer to everything, the sole answer, the panacea. You argue for a lot of conventional environmental improvements, like getting rid of single-use plastics, like energy efficiency. But you do think we're not going to be able to get a handle on those other issues if we just keep increasing our population.
That is exactly correct, and that will prove itself out. Again, at the end of the book, I give some of the finest authors who are on the same track that I'm on, and their predictions will prove out. Their understandings and their factual scientific research will prove out. And again, I can't say this enough. As human numbers go up, the consequences multiply also. And, I always say, if you have a 450-pound man and he's got heart disease, he's got bad knees, he's got cholesterol, he really can't go skiing. He certainly can't go for a run. He can't even do anything. Would it be better to add another 100 pounds to him so he would be 550 pounds just because you wanted to add more weight? Or would it be better if he got himself back down to 200 pounds? Well, wouldn't Denver right now be a better place to live with only 1 million people? And wouldn't Los Angeles be better with only 1 million people rather than 11 million people in the entire arena? And I lived in California back in 1965 when there were only 15 million people. Wouldn't it have been better to have people with forethought and a sense of responsibility to future generations to balance California's 15 million and keep it at 15 million, because we have the power to do that, rather than overrun the natural resources, the water sources, and so forth, and make LA is a nightmare to drive a car in today, and to breathe the air is a nightmare. The same in Chicago and the same in New York City.
So, Frosty, if we're convinced that America is overpopulated at 330 million people, not that it might be someday, but that it is now, is there a path towards a more flourishing country with fewer people? What are the policies we might want to put in place to decrease America's population? Or is there simply no way to achieve that?
There's always a way, Phil. And the fact is that the American females since 1970, when birth control came in, has been averaging 2.03 children per woman since 1970. And so we really paid attention to Earth Day, because that was the big call on Earth Day 1970. I was at Michigan State University. I was a senior that year and graduated, and we all talked overpopulation because it was happening to China, it was happening to India, it was happening to Mexico, it was happening around the world. And we changed, and so did Canada, and so did Europe, and so did Australia. All the Western cultures and Western countries really paid attention to Earth Day. The rest of the world didn't. And in fact, it went from 3.5 billion to add another 4.3 billion, and now it's at 7.8 billion, headed for 10 billion within the next 30 or 40 years.
So what specific policies do you see us putting into place to stabilize or decrease our population?
Well, we are already decreasing it simply by having a 2.03 fertility rate that's gone down in 2021 to around 1.98. So we're doing a great job. And the simplest way to turn off the spigot is to stop mass and endless growth in our country by stopping mass immigration into our country, because we're absorbing no less than 1 million to 1.2 million legal immigrants every year. And they're having a birth rate of around 900,000 per year. So that's about 2.1 million added net gain every year. And then according to Center for Immigration Studies with Mark Krikorian and Steve Camarata, we're taking in around 500,000 illegal migrants crossing the borders every year. So that's up around 2.6 million people. If we solve that problem alone, we would literally slow the Titanic, if you will, and give ourselves a chance for a viable and stable and sustainable civilization.
So if immigration, legal and illegal, is running somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 million annually, let's say that's been the average for the past 20 years, how much would you like to see immigration cut into the United States?
Well, I stated in my book, there are two ways we can go. First of all, just simply stop all immigration and help those countries and their people with food and water and whatever in their own countries, because in the end, they're going to have to stay in their own countries anyway. We couldn't have all of China or India migrate to the United States to save themselves. We certainly couldn't have all of Mexico because there are 129 million people. So we can't save the rest of the world. We can, however, save them in their own countries by showing them how to be sustainable. The other way to do it, my second way in my book, is to use the egress equals ingress equation. If 50,000 people leave the United States in 2021, then we could take in 50,000 people who would benefit the United States with skills and or abilities to function in our society. That would be a viable and reasonable solution.
So let's say we cut immigration, maybe as drastically as you're suggesting, maybe somewhat less drastically, and got to a stable population. But as you describe in the book, we have pretty good evidence that 330 million Americans isn't itself sustainable. Let's say we asked the scientists and they came back with 100 to 150 million as a sustainable number. Are there policies that could get us towards that? Or do we just simply have to accept that America for the foreseeable future will be overpopulated?
We have choices. One of my dear friends and yours, Dr. Jack Alpert from Stanford University, he has said that we need to be under 100 million. I would agree with that. When it comes to quality of life and sustainability into the future, then yes, at some point, I've also floated the idea that around the planet, the women around the planet need to come down to a one child per woman if the human race is going to survive the 21st century and all the other animals that are on this planet and bring the climate change into some kind of stability. But the real big key here is, and I want everyone to understand that, everything that drives population right now is made possible by gasoline, by oil. It has been shown that we are going to run out of oil sometime around mid-century, if not sooner or just a little bit later, and oil keeps this game going. So either we do something rational, reasonable, and logical to change our numbers to a sustainable level, or again, Mother Nature is going to do it for us. And I've already seen what Mother Nature has done, and I would like to do it with our reason and our minds and our choices rather than wait for Mother Nature to do it for us.
Well, Frosty, thank you so much for sharing this time with us. Again, the book is America's Overpopulation Predicament, Blindsiding Future Generations. You've given us a lot to think about today.
Well, thank you. And I hope you all are not only thinking about it, I also in the book have 3 chapters on what you can do individually in your own community, in your own state, in the nation itself, and of course, internationally. We're all in this together. Brown, black, red, yellow, orange, all of us are human beings. We have choices, and I hope that we make positive choices so that when I'm gone off the planet, the progeny of the planet and the future human beings and the future animals have the same opportunities to travel the world, to see the sights, to express themselves. That's my greatest joy, is to let future generations enjoy a thriving and viable planet and country here in the United States and abroad.
Frosty Wooldridge, thank you so much for being with us on The Population Factor.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Phil.